Good evening, everybody. Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, joined by Alfred Ezman, is we're going to do our first ever baseball live stream. We've done a bunch of live streams this year for basketball, for football, never done a baseball one. I'm looking forward to this. I want to see what the audience is like tonight. We're going to go over every single series. We will cover them in the order that you can see on the bottom of your screen. I know Alfred watched every pitch, I think, of Tennessee, Kentucky, didn't you? Or close to it?
Pretty much was glued to it this weekend.
Yeah, I kept a good eye on that one, either when I could watch it or doing stat broadcasts when I was at 10U baseball. Watched all of Vanderbilt, Florida. Watched some other series in between. Saw the end of Auburn, Mississippi State today. That was a wild doubleheader. We're going to get into anybody and everybody. And before we do, just a reminder, our content brought to you by BetOnline, which is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from Major League Baseball, golf, the NBA, and the NHL playoffs, which I think start tonight with our Nashville Predators. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to get in on all the action. Bet online where the game starts. Well, we have tallied the results. You can see them on the screen. I've given you who won what. If it's a versus, that means that team that won the series was at home. If it's an obviously that was a road series. And we had 6 series. We had some weird things. First of all, we had road teams actually winning this week, Alfred. That's not happened a lot. We had a sweep. We only had one of those this week. I feel like we've had more than those most weeks, but really the great teams in this league continue to be great. You know, somebody had to lose the series, Tennessee, Kentucky, but that was a competitive series. I think it was everything we hoped for. Didn't know how stylistically that was going to match up. Tennessee came to Lexington, got the better hand, where Kentucky just hadn't lost to much of anybody this year. You had A&M just exerting its dominance as it did last weekend. You had Florida salvaging a series in Nashville. You had Georgia taking 2 out of 3 to stay on point for getting in a regional, maybe hosting a regional. I think Georgia is being slept on as a potential host. We'll see how that pans out. You had LSU in a must-win series at Missouri, which it got, and Mississippi State helped its RPI get inside the top 50. So that was nice for the Bulldogs, sweeping Auburn, which just cannot catch a break. And didn't catch a break again today, but that's been the way Butch Thompson's season is gone. But let's start in Lexington. I think this was the series we look forward to the most. We said this was the headliner series. It was kind of gorilla ball against, and that's Tennessee. And not that the pitching isn't good, but it's not quite what it's been the last couple of years, versus Kentucky's keep the ball on the ground staff, the bunt and run, the hit the doubles, those kind of things. The more old school, almost 1980s style baseball is what Kentucky plays, if you want to give a Major League Baseball parallel. And U-Style won out. Tennessee emerges from Lexington with the series win after losing the first one. That's really hard to do. Losing game 1 and then going and winning the final 2 in somebody else's park. Christian Moore had, I think, a 3-home run game. Was it today? Yeah, it was today.
Yeah.
I mean, Tennessee, here's a wild score for you. I don't know that I've ever seen this. Tennessee scored 13 runs today. Got out hit 17-11, left 2 guys on base. That is being opportunistic. Yeah, and the Vols really hit Kentucky starters the last 2 days. Mason Moore and Dominic Neiman have been really good. Neiman didn't even get an out in game 2. And by the way, we're not going to go over the game 1s of the series too much because we've already done a separate video on that. We may touch on those here and there. If you want a full recap of those games, check our content from Friday. Actually, I think we put that out Saturday morning. But anyway, Alfred, your thoughts on Tennessee, Kentucky. Again, huge win for the Vols, going to Lexington and picking up 2 of 3 at a place where really nobody was beating Kentucky anywhere, anytime. So to do it in Lexington is extra special.
Yeah, this was a tone setter for both teams, whoever was going to come out on top this weekend. The crowd was very rowdy in Kentucky the entire weekend, especially that first night where they got that win. And then Tennessee, credit to them. They went out the next 2 games and got it done with their bats. I mean, you look at the first game on Saturday, 9-4 win. Kavaris Tears had 2 RBIs that game and the game on Sunday as well. He's been active at the plate. Not really a highlight guy you see, whereas it is with Christian Moore, Blake Burke with hitting home runs, but he really scores a lot of runners on that Tennessee team very quietly. So he's a name to continue to watch. Another insane thing: Tennessee had 9 home runs in those 2 games,
Jeez.
and 3 of them were by Christian Moore, which was absolutely today in this game. Moore is now Blake Burke broke the record for it 2 weeks ago, I think. Now Moore is now the all-time leader in home runs in Tennessee history. So those 2 are just going to go back and forth for that record this entire season. So I think that's funny as well. But yeah, Tennessee really just came out and did what they normally have done all year and hit the ball really well against Kentucky to get this win. Also want to shout out pitching wise for Tennessee. Aaron Combs came in relief. It was kind of just a steady, not too flashy, not overly great start from Drew Beam, but he did what he needed to do. Aaron Combs came in relief and shut down Kentucky the rest of the way. He went 4 2/3 with 3 hits, 7 strikeouts, and no earned runs. So that really helped Tennessee kind of build that lead Saturday and get the win. But overall, I mean, Tennessee took advantage, like you said, Chris, of 2 good pitchers Kentucky has, and Mason Moore and Neiman as well. And they really just kind of exploded, and they're making their way towards the top teams in the league that are A&M and Arkansas after this series.
Yeah, Tennessee kind of pieced it together pitching-wise in games 2 and 3 after losing the opener. Through 7 guys, you had the weird thing where they started oh, good grief. They started the Cal transfer, the lefty, in game 1. And then yeah, thank you. I couldn't remember his name. And then went to the Jacksonville State kid, whose name also escapes me at the moment. I know you know it. Yeah. And so, which is kind of they kind of went tandem there. And I think if you're Tennessee and you know that you don't get a great outing out of Beam or Seacrest, who are good starters, and maybe Beam is really good. Beam's the top. I don't know if I'm taking my pick of the top 10 starting pitchers in the league, he's on that list.
Yeah.
I don't know where with the guys Arkansas's got, but he's on the list because he's so durable, and Seacrest has been really good. They didn't get that, but I think really it was just their offense. Their pitching, their relievers weren't great. Kirby Connell, who's been called on as kind of a bulk lefty guy, pitched a lot more 2 years ago than he has this year. Didn't really throw that well today. But I mean, when you get all those hits, he hits balls out of the park. I think their pitching's good enough right now. They're hitting the ball at a crazy pace, and Kentucky had really been able to stop everybody so far. They've been able to keep the ball in the yard, and it feels like the dam just broke with that one.
Yeah, it did. And, Tennessee, their pitching honestly is not – I guess this is from today, updated after the games today. The team ERA is up to 3rd now in the SEC at 3.98 behind A&M and Arkansas. So it's not overly horrific when you talk about how they're doing. And then their opposing batting average that still sits, right in the middle of the league, kind of more toward the bottom half at 8th. I agree with you. As long as they're hitting 9 home runs in 2 games, I don't really see a way they're going to lose to a lot of teams going forward. So we'll just have to see. But as long as that pitching holds up, they'll be able to do good. And if they get one guy out of the bullpen to start, shoving really well, like Aaron Combs did Saturday, I think they can maintain a lot of wins going forward.
Yeah, and they've got Missouri next week, and Missouri swept them a year ago. But that was in Columbia. That was the first weekend of the season. That's Tony Vitello's alma mater. Missouri can do a few things that give teams problems in terms of just keeping the ball in the yard, but it feels like Tennessee to go and get a win at Lexington again. I think Kennesaw State won 2 out of 3 there way back when in maybe March or probably February. I don't remember the exact date at this point. But to go and do that with the rest of the schedule. By the way, Tennessee last year, Tennessee got the bad end of the schedule. It feels like they played anybody and everybody in the league who was any good. This year they avoid A&M and Arkansas. And so that's one of those situations where It feels like they're through some of the tougher part of their schedule. Not that any week in the SEC is ever easy, but getting that along with one of the better matchups next week for anybody, and that in their yard, they got to feel pretty good about where they sit Sunday night.
Yeah, it's a good breather after a top 5 series the weekend before to kind of just regroup and stuff against a team who, no one's really been good on the road before this weekend this season. So I'm going to go ahead and assume, sorry, any Missouri people out there, that Missouri's going to struggle against Tennessee's hitting in their own ballpark next weekend. So it's a good breather for Tennessee to kind of regroup before they hit the remainder of this season with some other tougher opponents.
Yeah, after that, they'll go Florida in Gainesville. Florida's got some issues. We'll get to the Gators in a minute. Go Vandy in Nashville. That'll be a big series. And then they'll finish up with South Carolina in Gainesville. Let's move on. And by the way, if you're joining us during this, we're going to go through every series. We're going to do it in the order that they're listed on your screen. So if you missed us talking about your team, we'll maybe circle back to take some questions or do a wrap up at the end, but you can go back. We will have that on our channel later. So if you don't catch your team, if you get in late, you can go back and find it when we post the replay later, which will be pretty quickly after we're done with this. But anyway, next up, let's see. I believe you followed. No, you didn't, or did you? Yeah, you followed Arkansas A&M, didn't you, this weekend?
A&M Alabama.
Excuse me. Yes. That's the one. That was another Thursday night series that went. Alabama finally salvaged a 1-run game at the end. You don't feel great losing 2 or 3 at home, but A&M has just been steamrolling. I mean, Tennessee and Kentucky are debated. Well, I mean, look, I think the top 4 teams in the country are all in the SEC. We can debate the order, but I think A&M has been playing well as anybody, say in April, and you just don't want any part of them anywhere right now. And they went in to Alabama and absolutely put up a bucket full of runs again. Pitching wasn't as great as it's been, and did lose a 1-run game, a 10-9er in game 3. But A&M just keeps going on very impressively week after week with those bats.
Yeah, they do. And I talked about the first 2 games. It was, I believe, the second game of the doubleheader yesterday was 18-9. So A&M just kind of skyrocketed run after run against Alabama in their pitching. And today was a little bit the opposite. And I think we talked about this too a little, Chris. The A&M pitching this weekend, granted, A&M did take 2 out of these 3 games, but the A&M pitching wasn't as dominant as it has been at points this year against Alabama. I guess that can be accredited to how Alabama can be at the plate batting sometimes. And they were that way yesterday in a 10-9 win. Alabama avoided a sweep. They were able to get 5 early runs off of Justin Lampkin, who got the start. And then really it was just a lot of hits and a lot of RBIs from a lot of different people. Cade Snell was the designated hitter for the Tide. He had 5 hits with a home run. McCants added in, as he usually does, with 3 hits. Gage Miller and Bryce Evelyn, 4 hits and 3 RBIs between the 2 of them. And then a bit of a surprise. I don't think I've heard this name as often, at least recently, but Mac Cassetti, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, goes 2 for 3 with 5 RBIs. Yeah, he had a grand slam as well in the second inning that really cracked the game wide open for Alabama. And then later on, he had a sac fly that scored McCants in. But it wasn't a bad day at the plate for A&M either batting. I mean, they had a bunch of hits, and Grahovic, who had a lights-out weekend, had 4 RBIs as well in that final game. But Alabama, it's sort of like vintage Alabama from earlier in the season, where they just kind of just hit the ball like crazy. And we saw that in that final game to avoid a sweep. I think if you're Alabama, you also have to feel slightly good. I mean, I think a sweep would be a whole lot different compared to just 2 out of 3. And especially, after losing a doubleheader when you didn't expect to play it, that's going to happen a lot, especially at the college level. And so they go out and they get the win in the 3rd game on the separate day. So going forward, I think A&M's pitching will look a little bit better. But Alabama, is able to survive, so to speak, with just a win in this series.
Yeah, Lampkin getting hit the way he did was a little bit of a surprise. Gassetti, who came to them from Florida, this is a lineup that most of these kids didn't start their careers at Alabama. And Gage Miller has been just one of the more I'm not going to say underrated because I don't know how people look at him, but when you're in the league with Jack Caglione and Braden Montgomery and Charlie Condon and Blake Burke and some of the hitters, he's a guy that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. So he got back on the home run board this weekend in that finale. TJ McCant's got 3 hits. He's had a really nice start to the year, cooled off a little bit. Cade Snell, the JUCO kid who's the DH, who's had a real nice season and kind of part-time duty, had a good weekend. I mean, look, A&M, I don't know what else to say. Jay Slavolette hit his 20th this year. They go, even the one they lose by a run. So A&M is now, look, at this point, what, 13-5, so in great shape for a national seed. Alabama, 7-13. I'd say it's manageable to get a regional bid at this point, although the schedule, well, they got Ole Miss next weekend. That's on the road. They got Mississippi State in their yard, Alabama at Alabama, and then they get Auburn. So Alabama certainly got a navigable road forward. A&M, I don't know. Well, I mean, look, we're wide open with Tennessee taking 2 of the 3 against Kentucky at the top again. A&M's going down the stretch. Georgia, now that'll be a very interesting matchup next week with the way those 2 clubs hit home runs. That'll be in Bluebell. I think it'd be a little more interesting at Foley Field. They get LSU, but that's in Baton Rouge, an LSU team with its back against the wall. We'll get to those guys in a minute. Ole Miss, again, Ole Miss is good ball club, but not, it's not playing, Tennessee or Kentucky or one of those guys. And then, boy, the series that I think the 2 series a year in the league are the one they played in Lexington this weekend and the one that will end it with Arkansas and A&M and Bluebell to end the year. So that's what's on deck for the Aggies. All right, I promise we get to Arkansas, and I skipped them by accident. 2-1 series win in Columbia. The closest to the series, the composite score is 14-13. You don't see a lot of those in the league, but it feels like every time Arkansas plays, that's what we get. Probably the biggest shocker of the weekend, unless I missed something on the box score, Carolina didn't have a home run all weekend. That park with Cassis, with Petrie, and both those guys have been down, especially Cassis. They got a lot of guys. Cole Messina is a double-digit home run guy. We've raved about Arkansas's pitching all year, and deservedly so. But I think in a weekend where a lot of other stuff got attention, and I think where South Carolina's been a little bit underrated, I think going to that place and holding them in the yard the entire weekend is super, super impressive. And by the way, their starting pitching wasn't great this weekend. It wasn't probably up to Arkansas standards, and you're going to get that in the SEC with some of these good hitting teams. But it's a testament to their pitching depth that they go in there and get a series win at a tough place to play.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, this was, we kind of hinted at it at the beginning of the show. It's regardless of where you go play, it's going to be tough to win on the road in this league. And Arkansas went out and did that, and they were able to do it against a team who has been pretty good at home this year. This is obviously updated from this weekend, but South Carolina's 19-6 at home this season. That's a very good home record, by anyone's standards. And again, the Gamecocks, I continue to say this with them. They kind of just have their own weird identity that no one knows what to make of it. Because right now they're sitting 9-9, 500 in SEC play. But they're able to steal one against Arkansas. I think that's fine for where they're at right now. As of right now, they're still ranked, I believe. Or no, they're not. I'm sorry. Or are they?
Or did they fall out last? I think they're still at. Well, I'll check that. But carry on.
Okay. Regardless, able to get one against Arkansas is very good for them at this point in the season. They, have some tough opponents coming up. They got Kentucky next weekend at home as well. Missouri, that's going to be on the road at Missouri, Georgia, and then Tennessee to end the year in Lindsey Nelson Stadium for a series. So they got some tough games to play. I think if they can continue to grind it out and get, obviously take advantage of your midweeks, and then they're able to get at least one, maybe win some of these series they have next, they'll be able to work their way into postseason play. It's just a tough road for them. I mean, obviously, I don't think a lot of people picked Arkansas, or I'm sorry, I don't think a lot of people picked South Carolina to win this series over Arkansas. Just kind of impressed with how they were able to get one. And impressed with Arkansas, able to kind of win a series on the road at a place where the Gamecocks tend to win a lot.
Yeah, I guess the highlights for Arkansas, Brady Tigert, who's probably he's probably the third best of their starting pitchers. I think Molina's had a little bit better year than he's had, and Hagen Smith's kind of in a category of his own. For him to go 6 innings, give up 2 runs, that's a tough commodity to get in this league for anybody anytime, is a guy that can go that many innings and give up 2 earned runs or fewer. So that was a key for them. Will McIntyre, I think, did get hit a little bit this weekend, which has not been happening. Nobody's hit McIntyre much of any lately. But I think the big thing, and it's hard to know how to talk about their offense because you look down the scores, they got 9 hits in the 9-6 win. They actually got 12 hits in the game that they lost 6-3. But it feels like they found some offensive balance. I don't think that there's certainly not a player of the year candidate in that lineup this year with all the guys in the league. But you look down the line, it feels like everybody got a hit or 2 hits. Peyton Holtz come on, had a good weekend for them. You don't need a whole lot of offense if you're Arkansas with the way that pitching staff is. Again, it's not just the rotation. They got a good 8-10 guys that come out of the bullpen that could pitch for anybody. So it just feels like it's the same story for Arkansas. It's just do what you do and it's enough.
Yeah, it's almost flipped from, what we were talking about with Tennessee at the beginning of the show. Tennessee, it's like, well, you're going to need the bats to kind of compensate for your pitching. And if you have pitching that's okay enough, you're going to be able to win games. With Arkansas, it's, if you have pitching that's through the roof and elite like it's been all year, you just need bats that are good enough to get you, a handful of runs and you can win a lot of games. So opposite ends of the spectrum. We'll see. And again, I have my calendar circled on that A&M series already at the end of the year with them because I think that's a great test to see how they are heading into Hoover and then the postseason beyond that. So we'll see how long it holds up, but I can't complain as of right now. It's holding up for them so far.
All right, next up on the list, we're getting to Vandy, Florida. We covered the first 2 games in Saturday morning's video. Vanderbilt took both those and got out to a 2-0 lead in this one. And then in game 3 on Saturday, then the bats kind of stagnated. And Vanderbilt had J.D. Thompson, a lefty, kind of cruising along. And then the game hit a turning point in the 4th inning there. Thompson had a couple outs, and I cannot remember who was at the plate at the time. But they called timeout. There's a commotion from the Florida dugout. They showed the replay, went to his forearm after going to the rosin bag. And after a couple minutes of discussion, he got ejected for using a foreign substance. Based on what I was kind of putting together from listening to TV, Kayla Anderson was the I don't know what we call them in baseball, the sideline report in football, said something about sunscreen. And here's the significance of that. If you're mixing sunscreen with rosin, that increases your spin rate. And if that's what went on, that's why he got kicked out of the game. You can Google that. That's a common way and I'm not saying he did or didn't, but they kicked him out for something. And, when sunscreen comes up, it's that, and you can look it up again. When you mix it with rosin, it gives you a higher spin rate on the baseball. He got kicked out of the game, which means he's going to miss next weekend too against Mississippi State. So then they went to Ethan McElvain, who's their stud freshman lefty, and one of the better arms on that staff, just kind of a bulk reliever out of the pen who could end up starting for them. He hurts his back in the middle of his warmups. And you get unlimited warmups, I think, when a guy's been kicked out of a game. I'm not sure about that. Maybe the rules are different. When there's an injury, I know that you get, as many warm-up pitches you need. Anyway, McElvain comes in, and he hurts himself. So I presume he's out a while. That's another arm they're down in that pen, which is going to be tough for them. They've still got a lot of depth, but Florida goes on, and that ended up being a turning point. Florida took the lead. Tyler Sheldon hit a big 3-home run off Luke Guth, who's the guy who wound up coming into the game after McElvain and Thompson were out of it. The rest of the bullpen, other than Grayson Carter, held him down, but that was kind of enough. For Florida, Jack Caglione tied the NCAA record, 9 games with home runs in a row. Had a chance to come up in the 9th. That game was close. They had a free base. They passed him, which did make Florida fans very happy, but I don't blame him if you've seen the way he's hitting the ball. So Yeah, Caglione gives them, what was it, 5 innings, 2 earned runs. In the SEC, you'll take that more often than not. Cade Fisher came in, gave him 2/3 of an inning. Fisher Jameson, who's kind of up and down but really talented, closed that game out. And so Florida salvaged the win against Vanderbilt, or salvaged the series against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt wins 2 out of 3. Florida at this point is now, let me double check this, 8-10. So Florida's big task is going to be staying above 500. They got to start winning some midweek games, which they've not done. They're 20-19. The RPI is 35. I think of Florida, and I remember this happening with Georgia. I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago. Georgia had the #1 strength of schedule in the country. I don't know if Florida's is there, but I bet it's going to be close. And they just needed to stay 1 game above 500 to get in the NCAAs, which it did. That's going to be Florida's task, is winning some midweek games. Because the weekends, 8-10 in the SEC, 2 games under 500 is going to get you into the tournament. So keep an eye on the Gators there. All right, next up we got Georgia and Ole Miss. That was one of there were fewer runs scored in that this weekend than maybe I thought. Ole Miss did sneak in a win. Ole Miss got some pitching in that one. And I've written a couple notes down. Excuse me, let me get to those. I think the big thing, let me start on the Ole Miss side. JT Quinn has not pitched for them, I'm going to say, in about 6 weeks. He came in, gave them an inning and 2/3 of relief in that 3-2 win they got. And Gunnar Dennis gave them a good start that game. He went 4 1/3 scoreless. Georgia also got a couple guys back. Charlie Goldstein, who had been, I think, their #1 starter, actually pitched out of relief in this one and gave them 2 scoreless. Matthew Hoskins, who I think hadn't started or played in about a year. I'd have to double check that. So Georgia, which is lacking arms, gets a guy back. I wouldn't have expected any of these games to go 3-2, but one of them did. That's the one that Ole Miss won. Now, the other one was just kind of Georgia doing Georgia things. Charlie Condon hit 2 more home runs. I think that gives him 26. Colby Branch hit 1. I guess Tennessee probably came out of the weekend with the home run lead again. Georgia and Tennessee are kind of battling back and forth for that national lead. But, yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to watch Ole Miss, Georgia. But that one, they kept it in the yard a little bit more than I thought, or at least kept the scoring a little bit more in check than I would have expected. If you're Ole Miss, and by the way, one note for Georgia, Colton Smith, 3 1/3 innings to finish out the win that they got to close the game. He's been pretty good find for them this year. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about this one. I thought there'd be a little bit more scoring in Georgia. Again, look out for that team. I think that's probably your most underrated team in the league, and a team that's got a sneaky shot to host if it can finish hot.
Yeah, I feel like at times we don't give them enough credit. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily on the level of this said top 4 that we have as the best teams in the SEC and the best teams in the country, but they're fully capable of being competitive in this postseason in the NCAA tournament if they want to be. And I think, going back to what you said, I watched a little bit of the 3rd game, like in the 3-2 game that happened with Ole Miss. And I think that was finally Ole Miss kind of putting their foot all the way down to the ground and saying, okay, really shut down, really make this a low scoring battle, and we'll have a good chance here. Because it seemed like it was this entire series that was heading that direction. It started with an 8 inning run rule by Georgia, and then Georgia won, I believe it was 7-2 that second game. And then eventually Ole Miss came in and won 3-2 after, finally putting their foot down and whatnot. But with Georgia, I think the key for them, they just need to gain a little bit of consistency with the pitching. Georgia went through, 6 pitchers in that 3-2 game. And I think that was just because Ole Miss lineup was having them flustered. I mean, there wasn't a guy out there more than 3 innings. Brian Zeldin sat out there the final 3 innings of that game and did solid work. But if Georgia can continue to put it together against some of these teams they're going to play, they should be able to work their way into an NCAA tournament bid, and who knows, be pretty competitive as well. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, if Georgia gets it, it will have earned it. Its remaining series at A&M, Vanderbilt in Athens, at South Carolina, and then it's got Florida in Athens. And by the way, another little scheduling note for them. They play Kennesaw State this weekend, which could be a little tricky. Took a series from Kentucky earlier in the year, but that's their last midweek game, if I've got that right. So for a team that struggles with pitching, I think they've got about 7 or 8 guys that I consider pitchable on an SEC weekend. That's their issue because the bats are going to be there. If they do not have to roll out guys for midweek starts, they're going to be more rested and maybe a little bit tougher customer on the weekend on the pitching side than they've been. So just something to keep an eye on there. All right, I think, goodness, we only got 2 more to talk about. LSU at Missouri, I think this was the one series I missed. I had Missouri. I picked my spot. I had Missouri to take the upset. It was one of those things, as soon as I did, it's like, that's a dumb pick. But I made it. But you know what? It was actually a 2-1, and it was a pretty good series. I think the thing, and look, it's Missouri. It's the worst lineup in the league, but hey, LSU has needed some pitching. The lineup has been a little bit of a disappointment, but some weekends they just roll guys out there and they just can't get outs. And they went Nate Ackenhusen and more notably Griffin Herring in that 6-2 win that they got. Herring went 5 scoreless, struck out 8. He's been really good for them this year. He's in their top 4 or 5 arms. Ackenhusen's a guy who was really good for them last year and really hadn't measured up to that this year. So I think if you are LSU, you got to feel a little bit better from that end. And here's the weird thing. We talked about that going in. Luke Holman was the only guy that they've been able to count on. And Holman gave him a poor start. He goes 4 2/3, 6, 5 of them were earned. But Gage Jump was tremendous on Friday night or in that game 1. I think he struck out 14 in that run rule win. So I think if you're LSU, you coming out going, okay, it's Missouri. It's not like you're playing Kentucky or Tennessee or Georgia or A&M, but it is an SEC team and one that's played well of late. You go on the road, you find several guys who give you lots of good innings, which has been an issue for them. LSU's got its back against the wall. It's got an uphill climb in this one to get to a regional. I think they were in D1s last week, and that's based on projection, but here you go if you're LSU. You got Auburn this weekend and LSU. Auburn is just scuffling something mighty. We'll get to them next. Then you go A&M, but that's in Baton Rouge. Then you got Alabama next, and then you got Ole Miss at home. That is one of the easier schedules you're going to find here on out. Not easy. Don't keep in mind. Don't misquote me here because you got to play in there, and Alabama on the road won't be easy. But you got some winnable series there, and the ones that are less winnable are in your park. And LSU had to have that this week, and I think it's not just getting the series win, but it's the way they did it with the pitching that had to leave Jay Johnson encouraged exiting the weekend.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I'm happy that you mentioned too the Luke Holman start and how that wasn't up to par. So, and that's really, if you hear that, you're like, oh man, well, LSU had a really bad weekend then, and they were able to scrape it out. And Chris, give your upset pick a little more credit because Missouri did lead that 3rd game 2-0 at one point, and LSU was able to kind of just turn it up a notch. I think they left Ackenhausen in for one more inning and then put Herring in after him. But regardless, the LSU bats were able to turn it up. I'm trying to see. Tommy White, this was the game before.
White had a nice weekend. Yeah,
he did. He had. This was the game Missouri won. Actually, I want to get back to that. He had a 2-run homer to make it a 1-run game in the 9th, and Missouri was able to close it out. I believe that was Ryan Magic who had his first save of the season. And then the Missouri bats, just to mention them real quick: Trevor Austin, Brock Daniels, 2 for 4, 2 RBIs each. Daniels homered in that middle game of the series. And I think, just the game after for LSU, Ashton Larson, he's kind of turned it up a little bit the past few weekends. I've been hearing his name a lot more. He homered. Braswell, that South Carolina transfer they have, RBI double. And then an error was thrown. I believe these 2 teams are the teams with the most errors in the SEC, if I'm not mistaken. Last time I checked, at least. And Missouri had a bad error that on a Tommy White hit that allowed Alex Milazzo to score. So that really kind of put that second game out of reach. But again, I think LSU needed this series win, and their home record I just looked was 17-7. Also very favorable for them, especially when you have a team like A&M coming to the box to play. And LSU, they're going to have to earn it. And I think it's another good kind of breather series coming up next for them against Auburn, a team that's faltering and a team that put up, I think, yeah, it's on our little thing down below. 5 runs this weekend was all they were able to put up. And LSU, a team that struggles with pitching, if they're facing a team that is only able to put 5 runs the weekend before, that favors them a lot, especially if they're at home. So we'll have to see. But don't count the Tigers out yet. I know it hasn't been the national championship season it was a year ago for them. But it's still a long uphill battle that they're starting to gain traction in, I'll say.
Yeah, that was actually Ryan Magic's second save. He's been kind of increasingly a guy that they've used well out of the pen. Javin Pimental has been really good for them. He gave them a good start. He went 5 innings. That was weird. The one game they won, they give up home runs to Tommy White, Jared Jones, Hayden Travinski, their best 3 hitters. You'd think that's not a game they can win, especially with Luke Holman on the mound. And then that's baseball for you. Sometimes you just never know what you're going to get. Missouri, look, if Carrick Jackson gets them to the SEC tournament year 1, he will have done a miracle. They've got at Tennessee next. Then they got South Carolina, Auburn back-to-back. They go to Mississippi State. Not impossible. They have got at this point they've got a 4-game lead on Auburn. There's 2 teams that don't go. They're a game up on LSU, but LSU will get the tie break, and then they're tied at 6-12 with Ole Miss. And they don't play each other this year. So if it's tied, I guess the tiebreaker will be going to the top of the standings. So, whoever did the best against Tennessee or Kentucky or Arkansas or A&M, whoever wins this league. So I did not think we'd be talking 6 weeks through the season about Missouri being an SEC tournament possibility. I'm guessing there's still I like Ole Miss's talent and their chances to get there a little bit better. But just going to mention that I think that they, again, if you've not been paying attention to this team, they played so much better in the last month. That would have been a big series win for Missouri, but it didn't come out that way. All right, last up, the last series to conclude, and they did it today with the pair of 7-inning games. State wins them both. Wins the first one. We talk about pitchers in this league. Jerangelo St. John might be a top 5 starter, the switch pitcher. And Rob Freeman, Pitching Ninja, they had a graphic of him overlaid his lefty and his righty. That was pretty cool. So go check that out if you can. He goes 6 2/3, 1 earned run, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts. Tyson Harden got the save in that game. He ended up getting the win in game 2. Not often you see a guy get a win and a save in the same day. But congrats to Tyson Harden for doing that. But two very low scoring games. I didn't really expect Auburn's pitching to hold Mississippi State's bats in check, but that's what happened. Carson Myers threw 6 innings of 1-run ball. I think they've had trouble finding guys to stick in the rotation and keep there, but I think he'll have a leg up on that down the stretch for them. But Auburn, what a season of horrible. They're up 3-1 in this one. They go into the 7th, which again is the last inning. They give up a couple leadoff singles. State gets a 2-run, I think, single to take the lead. I think it was the 8th inning. I think Amani Leary had a leadoff double, and they picked him off second. You're like, that's your chance. And they end up giving up the run to win it anyway. But Auburn now 2-16 in the league. And again, you look at the 6-game series they played, that might be the toughest draw in the history of college baseball. If not, I'd like to see who it's been. But Mississippi State, which I continue to think is underrated because of its starting pitching and because of a bullpen that's good enough. And again, I still think that lineup is capable of hitting better than it has. They get the only sweep of the weekend. And looking good. The RPI is lower than you need it to be, or lower than you'd like it to be. But look, you're 10-8. If they're picking the field today, you're getting into the tournament with that record. So we'll see how State will finish up. But that was not going to say a much needed sweep. I think State could have gone 2-1 in that one and been okay. But to get the sweep, especially after being down 2 in the last inning, you had to feel really good coming out of the weekend if you're a Bulldog fan.
Yeah, certainly. And Tennessee, I'm about to say Tennessee. I have no idea why. Mississippi State, I'm sorry. That last game against Auburn, you were mentioning the 3-1 lead Auburn had. The two guys who I think have just been the catalyst for them at the plate. I've said this multiple times. Dakota Jordan, Connor Husak, they came out. Husak had a run that scored to make it to draw within 3 runs, and then he had that last hit to eventually put State over the top for that win. And Mississippi State sort of has 2 arms now with Urangelo and then Cal Stevens, who we talked about on Friday.
I think that's 3 arms.
Yeah, 3. Yeah. 3 technically, with how he's able to go either side with that glove. That glove's very cool, by the way. Look up a picture of it. I don't know how they're able to make that, but yeah, the 3 arms that they have, I think they're able to kind of contend with some of these top teams. I don't know if right now if I'd say they'd go out and win a series against, like, let's say that top 4 we keep mentioning, but I think they could be able to at least scrape a win against them. And they're turning it around a little bit after a shaky start to this season, and with a now above 500 SEC record, they're going to start to make noise going forward. They have a weird a game I might want to watch. They have a weird midweek this week at Memphis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why it's at Memphis. Something with scheduling, I'm not sure, but that's something I'm going to watch out just because of how teams have been on the road this year. Not that I don't have a lot of faith in Mississippi State, but I think that's just a game to kind of watch out and see what they do, especially with pitching, just because I don't know if you're going to throw Stevens or if Urangelo out there for a midweek necessarily. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. No, they won't. They've got. It looks like they've got a home and home with Memphis this year. They've already played one back in week 5. Won that one. They've had some issues in the midweeks this year. They've lost to Austin Peay and to South Alabama and to Central Arkansas. So that we've talked about the RPI, and it hasn't made sense to me why theirs is as low as it is. But that may be part of it. All right, we'll go. We'll be wrapping it up here in a few minutes. We'll take your questions on the way out. So if you've got some, drop them in the chat. Super chats are appreciated. That helps us fund the channel here. But while we're waiting for those, if they come in, and if they do, we'll answer them. If not, I'll give you next weekend's matchups. Tennessee at South Carolina. Vanderbilt hosts Mississippi State. Georgia travels to A&M. We've got Florida goes to Arkansas. We got Tennessee is hosting Missouri, and who am I leaving out here? Alabama goes to Ole Miss, and LSU hosting Auburn. I guess the big series in that one. Kentucky, South Carolina is interesting. Vanderbilt, Mississippi State is interesting. Those are probably missing. Oh, A&M Georgia to me is the top one of those. Just because I don't know that I trust Georgia's pitching to match up with A&M's. And we're going to preview all these later in the week, by the way. Probably my guess is I'll do some of these will get their own standalone video, and then we'll group some of these together. So if you're looking for a little more analysis of how they shape up next weekend, I'll have that for you. And by the way, we'll have power rankings tomorrow too. But I think that one, just because when you've got Charlie Condon, you got Fernando Gonzalez, you got Corey Collins, who's having one of the more underrated seasons. You got Colby Branch, I think, has hit double-digit home runs. You got a couple of guys on the bench with some pop. I'm not saying Georgia's going to go into College Station and upset A&M, but I think that's a team that A&M's not just going to be able to mow over because of the bats. And you never know if it gets in one of these games like Tennessee and Kentucky played today. I still would like A&M's chances because of the back end, that bullpen with Aschenbeck and those guys and Stevens Sadeo. But I think that that one's got – I really want to see how Georgia matches up in that because I just love that lineup.
Yeah, very interesting to see that one. One I kept my eye on, or I'm definitely going to watch out for too, Kentucky, South Carolina.
Yeah.
I just think, Kentucky coming off a series loss to Tennessee, one they probably wanted a little bit just because it was top 5 and they wanted to stamp their name at the top. They're going. Is that in South Carolina? Am I mistaken? No, it
Yes,
is.
it is. It is.
So it's in Founders Park, and I talked about it earlier with the Arkansas series. Hard place to keep balls out of the yard. Arkansas,
Yep.
with their pitching, managed to do it, but a hard place to do that. South Carolina's been good at home this year. That would be another way for Kentucky if they kind of want to keep themselves towards the top of the SEC conversation and really the top of the country conversation. They can go out and get a huge series win there if they do that. So that one will be very competitive. I know, Chris, you'll be watching this too, but Vandy, Mississippi State.
Yeah.
I just think, it's a good matchup, both sides. It's going to be very competitive, all three games that they have and whatnot. But mine's certainly going to be the South Carolina series, just because for South Carolina, I'm sure they want a statement series win, and beating Kentucky at this point is a statement series win. And Kentucky, they want to kind of bounce back. So those are the two that I'm very intrigued with.
Yeah, I'm going to give you. Looks like we don't have any questions, so I'm just going to give you 3 quick thoughts on the way out. And these are some things we've touched on, but I think they're worth unpacking a little bit more. Now, we didn't touch on this one. I know Kentucky didn't get the series win this weekend, but my goodness, the crowds there have been great. I mean, you saw this in Knoxville a couple of years ago when Tennessee just hadn't been into baseball at all. All of a sudden, that 2022 team, everybody bought in and got excited, and now Knoxville weekends or sellout baseball. I feel like the same thing is started to happen in Lexington. I think they had 7,000 plus in the park. I know some Tennessee fans travel to that, and so give them credit. But I mean, feels like Kentucky is really getting into baseball. Nick Mingione's had 2 outstanding years in a row. Maybe last year at the end of the year when they hosted a regional, that got some people to dip their toe in the water. I feel like in this league now, with Kentucky kind of bought in, you got 13 teams that are pretty into it. Missouri's not been to an NCAA tournament since it's been in the league. And it's just been getting its hat handed to it just because that's what the league is. But even then, they've been competitive. I feel like now, though, you got 13 fan bases that are fairly excited about college baseball. And I think that's a place, and you're a lot younger than I am, but that's a place I don't think I've seen since I've followed the league. So that was item number 1 that kind of caught my eye this weekend.
Yeah. I think this is, the premier conference for it, and everyone is starting to take notice. Really, everyone is. It's more competitive than ever before. I don't know the number, so to speak, we'll have in the NCAA tournament. I'm sure it's going to be it's going to be in the double digits. I mean, at the very least, I think there's a realistic chance it could be, with teams like Georgia and Mississippi State starting to turn the page. LSU, we talked about kind of starting to find their footing, possibly with this Missouri series win on the road. So we'll have to see. But it's awesome to see. Like you mentioned, that Kentucky series, I don't know this for sure. They probably broke their own attendance record from Friday night on Saturday or Sunday. They very well possibly could have with how the crowd was there. And that's an awesome place to see, or that's an awesome thing to see at that place. And it's great to get baseball expanding to all these other schools around the league.
All right, number 2, Vanderbilt's pitching situation. The J.D. Thompson suspension, he'll miss next weekend. Vanderbilt does have a midweek game against Tennessee Martin, which is not very good. That's one Vanderbilt can probably win, throwing the back end of its staff, although nothing is a certainty in college baseball. Mississippi State team that we've said is a top half of the league rotation. It'll be interesting to see what Vanderbilt does. I would presume Ethan McIlvain with that back issue, who's one of their key arms and a guy that usually gives them 2 to 3 innings most weekends. I shouldn't assume he's not going to be available, but I think that is something to watch, given that he had a back issue that had been an issue before, although I don't think it's cost him any time. That flared up. So that's something to watch. Devin Futrell has not pitched in about a month. He's their number 3 starter. He's a guy that's pitched a ton of games in this league. I would presume they will put him back in the rotation. They've moved Grayson Carter to closing. I would imagine next weekend they'll go Holton, Cunningham, Futrell, but boy, their bullpen after that, it's a lot of freshman reliance, and they got some good ones, but they're going to be down, I'm going to guess, 2 lefties facing the Bulldogs next weekend. Oh, by the way, the J.D. Thompson had an ERA of around 2. He'd been their midweek guy, but that's a big loss for Vandy. I think the pitching matchup in Nashville next weekend between them and Mississippi State is going to be something to watch.
Yeah, I think so too. I just looked at Vanderbilt's stats when it comes to pitching compared to the other teams. Where they're kind of at their best, their pitching staff, unless I'm mistaken, is the opposing batting average they give up. It's third in the league behind Arkansas and Kentucky at 227. And I think that's key because, Mississippi State, they kind of were able to shut down the Auburn lineup, but then Auburn was also able to shove a little bit against their own lineup. And I don't know if Mississippi State will be able to put their money on that sort of strategy going to Nashville for a series. So that'll be interesting to watch if Vandy's able to, without JD, shove against this Mississippi State lineup, they could get more wins just because they really don't give up a lot of hits, and they don't give up a lot of, good averages to people they played this year. So that'll be something to watch because I don't know, again, if Vandy's able to somehow keep their pitching under wraps, they might be able to win because I don't know if Mississippi State will go to Nashville and win with the same strategy they did over Auburn this past weekend.
Yeah, that's a tough staff to hit for sure. All right, number 3 is LSU's resurgence. Let's recap LSU's situation coming into the weekend. Lost its first SEC series, Mississippi State. Beat Florida in the opener, lost the next 2. Swept by Arkansas at Arkansas. Beat Vandy on that Friday night or the Thursday night, I think it was. You're thinking, all right, this is their time to get it turned around, lose the next 2. Swept at Tennessee. Didn't play bad, but swept. Had to get 2 out of 3 on the road against Missouri, which was playing well. It did that. Now you got Auburn next weekend in your park. And, look, let's just play along. If LSU can sweep that next weekend, it's 8-13. Certainly not out of the question to get in a regional. RPI right now 39. Then it gets tough. You got A&M and Alabama the next 2 weekends, although the first one at home, and then Ole Miss to end in a very winnable series and kind of a rivalry series in the season. LSU, I think, quietly had to get a series win this weekend to keep its NCAA tournament hopes alive. It did that. Now I think the big thing is the pitching it got from Griffin Herring. You feel like Luke Holman's going to be solid. He had an aberration of an outing in a bad way. They won anyway. Gage Jump was great. You just never know if you're going to get Thatcher Hurd right, because when he's on, he's really, really good. I'm really intrigued with LSU going forward because it's now put itself in position. It's got a lot of work to do. It's got to play its best ball of the season, but it put itself in position to win. I'm going to see if that pitching is good enough to carry them going forward.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I have to agree 100% on it. I mean, I think, they have it favorable with how their schedule is, other than Alabama, their SEC series for the rest of the year at home. And they're relatively good at home, 17-7. I'm sure plenty of teams around the country would take a 17-7 home record. And, with how they've been pitching, even Ackenhausen, I got to give him a little bit of credit. He gave up 2 earned runs. Other than that, it was pretty solid outing he had. I mean, I think it was just the fact that LSU didn't have any runs yet that put pressure on Jay Johnson to be like, all right, well, we got to pull him and put Herring in the game. But even still, he had a good outing. I think he's obviously not the number 1 ahead of guys like Holman or Gage Jump or Thatcher Hurd on a good day. But I think he's a guy they can still depend on if needed for a start if they're in an emergency type situation with a guy like Herring backing him in the bullpen. It'll be intriguing to watch. I don't know how I don't think they have any more challenging midweeks either. LSU. I don't know how Nichols, Grambling State, or Northwestern State are, but with all of them at the
games,
box,
LSU should win. That's how good they are.
Yes. So, I mean, they should be able to handle those as well. Maybe those are games if they were dying to try to get Thatcher Hurd and tune in if they wanted to, just again before a SEC series that's not more winnable for them. So I don't know if I'd do it right before Texas A&M, but I might want to do it before, let's say, later on in the year before Ole Miss at home, based on how Ole Miss has been playing this year. So they kind of have a lot to evaluate still, but I like how they kind of got their feet under them a little bit against Missouri, and maybe they can start to sprint uphill towards a postseason run.
All right, we do have one question on the way out. Thanks to Dan Rudlaw for the super chat. How many SEC teams will host a regional? Feels like the over-under is about 6. Well, I'll give you the detailed answer. That sounds close. Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, A&M, I would have to think would be locks at this point. I mean, not just locks to host, but locks as national seeds. Kentucky's RPI, I'll have to look that up. I think they're still top 2 or 3. Yeah, I don't know how you could keep any of those teams out of the not just hosting, but national seed mix at this point. From there, I think right now Vanderbilt is borderline. Vanderbilt's got a shot going forward with some of the series, but it just doesn't have a great series win. I guess if Florida and LSU make the NCAA tournament, that's going to help them. But Vanderbilt doesn't have a lot that it's accomplished on the weekend. Now, one thing it's got is it's not lost midweek games. It's lost one. So sometimes it's those little warts you don't look at that help you. And so Vanderbilt's got that in there. But so I think they're borderline. South Carolina probably borderline, sitting there 9-9. Georgia, as I've said, I think Georgia's hosting case is being overlooked. Georgia's 9-9 in the league, 11 RPI. I mean, that feels like, who else would be in the mix at this point? Alabama would have a shot. Everybody else feels, yeah. State's RPI is 47. Yeah, which I think they're a better team than that, but the committee's going to look at that. And I don't know. I mean, gosh, I guess if you go and win series at Vandy in Arkansas, then you would have to start talking about it. I would think the RPI would climb up at that point, but that feels like a lot to bite off. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think 6 is a good over-under. I don't know how you deny them 4 national seeds, and I think either, give me 2 of Georgia, South Carolina, Vandy, and Florida. If Florida got hot, could maybe do it too, given the series records and wins. But yeah, 6 seems about right to me.
Also, I don't know if they take this into account, but Georgia is 24-3 at home, which is crazy. Yeah. So if they were able to, that would really bode well for them if they were able to host a regional in Athens, because they've been lights out at home. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, where the ball gets out, especially short right field porch, that I feel like that park is just tailor-made to that lineup, and it's played that way. All right. First baseball live stream we've ever done. Great numbers, over 300 of you in here. That's pretty good for a live stream. We're going to try to keep doing it if you guys like them. So with that, hit the like button, tell a friend. Yeah, do the things that help our channel. We'll try to serve you guys in return. For Alfred Ezman, I'm Chris Lee. You're watching Southeastern 14, presented by Bet Online.